Welcome to curl 8.16.0, September 10, 2025. Um, this is a new release. So I am Daniel Stenberg. Of course, I do these release presentations. I work on curl every day. That's my site. I work for wolfSSL. That's my Mastodon account. The image is of my workplace where I actually sit here right now, but from another angle, right? So this is release 270. It's a crazy number, and it keeps going up for some reason. And this time around, we have contributions from 76 people, and 39 are new. 32 authors, and 17 of them are new. So a lot of people continue to help out. And actually, this contributor count, we actually went over to 3,500 for a short moment there before I removed some duplicates. So then we are below 3,500 again, but it's going to go up again, of course. So a lot of people are still helping out, and that's awesome, right? And it seems like we actually increase the amount of contributors over time. Awesome. And we have been doing this for a while. This time around, we spent 56 days to do this release, which is our regular planned release cycle time, right? So was a full proper release cycle, 8 weeks, and it's 10,036 days since the first curl release. A long time. We also added a few things. So we actually added 3 command line options this time. So now we have more command line options than we have ever done releases, 272. We have 98 public libcurl functions. We added 2 this time around. And I think no, we didn't add any setup options actually. So we're at 308 setup options. So a lot of things in the project and library. What I want to do, of course, I want to go through these things like I normally do, and maybe most important this time around is, of course, the 2 security advisories that we have announced and published in sort of in sync with this release. And I wanted to start with this. We call it out of bounds read for cookie path, CVE 2025-9086. And I should just mention that both of these security advisories that I'm going to mention here are severity low. They're really fringe cases. You really have to have a series of bad luck to even ever trigger this. But anyway, in this case, it's a cookie bug. So if you use curl and you communicate with a site with a name over HTTPS and you get a cookie, and then you can communicate with the same name, a host with the same name without HTTPS. That is first a secure one and then an insecure one. And the insecure communication could then accidentally actually overwrite a cookie that was set as secure with the first connection. And so it works if you have a malicious site on clear text with the same name as one with a secure context or a secure HTTPS connection, which is a really rare setup, and it is a weird combination. So read up about the details, but it's unlikely to ever hurt anyone actually, but there is a tiny risk. So we at least had to treat it as a security problem. This was found by Google Big Sleep, which is some kind of AI-powered bug system search they have. They have not revealed details to me exactly how much AI, how much human, or how much slop or retries they had to wade through to get to this. And I hope we will get to learn more about such details, but who knows? In the next one is here the second vulnerability. We call it the predictable WebSocket mask. This is also severity low, possibly even lower than the previous one, but still a potential security problem. This was found by Calvin Rucco, and this is actually a problem that was identified in the WebSocket communication back in 2011. There was actually a paper written about this potential attack, and for a brief moment in time, the browsers actually halted their WebSocket implementations just because of this particular problem when the mask in WebSocket was actually before there was a mask in the WebSocket protocol, but anyway, the mask was added then into the protocol to combat this kind of flaw, and we kind of accidentally introduced this flaw in curl by not updating the mask in outgoing WebSockets correctly. And the idea here is then that if you have a malicious WebSocket server, it could sort of generate traffic over the wire that could then, to a proxy over the connection, look like a valid HTTP traffic. And that proxy could then be tricked into saving that content in its cache. And by that, the malicious WebSocket server could poison the proxy cache. And this is supposed to be defeated by curl updating the mask correctly in all outgoing WebSocket frames, which it should do, which the spec says it should do. And this particular omission is actually highlighted in the security section of this RFC as a problem. But still, this is the only way this is actually a problem is first you need to do HTTP, that it's clear text WebSocket, over, which is sort of rare in itself, and it has to be a malicious server, and it has to be using one of these faulty, buggy proxies that would then get poisoned. So I'd say it's really low severity. It is a security problem. There is a potential problem in there, but should be rare. So let's leave those now and switch over to the changes that we have done for this release, because we've done something, a few things. We added the maybe slightly confusingly named option called -- follow. It's actually very similar to -- location, which it actually follows redirects. And this, we're introducing this new option to follow redirects because this one actually respects or does what most users already thought curl would do in correspondence or together with the --X option. So it will only use the --X extra option in the first request if the redirect code says so. So going forward, this is actually going to be more likely the option you want to do when you tell curl to follow redirects, and if you use the --X option. It's a little bit complicated to explain in short, but you'll if you ever used a redirect and you use the --X option in combination, you know what I'm talking about. This is the better way to do it. We also added this new option for just throwing away the output called the --out null. And you could then ask yourself why we would have an option for that. You could just save it into /dev/null or something. But this is portable across all platforms and is actually faster to do this. So this basically, if you're just getting something and you don't care about saving the data, you can just use out null and it'll just throw it away in the most effective way we can do. We also added a little bit of a niche option here, which is called parallel max host, which is a way to limit the number of connections used to a specific single host when you're doing parallel transfers. Imagine, for example, you want to download a lot of files in parallel or a lot of URLs, maybe thousands, and you ask, sure, I want to do 100 transfers in parallel, but you only want to use 10 connections per host name as the maximum. This is this option. So do 1,000 transfers, but only ever use this many connections to the single host name. It's a way to reduce the load per host, per server your curl is then communicating with. Both these options called retry delay and retry max time, two options that accept the time in seconds. They both now accept the time in decimal seconds as most other options already did. So you can write the time, 3.45 if you want it to be a fraction of not a full integer second, but you can do 0.135 and so on, so that to just get higher precision on the timings. Small detail, but kind of handy. And here's a biggie. We actually now add support for specifying long options on the curl command line tool, like this style as shown on the screen. Dash dash long opt value or equals value, as in one word without any space at all. This is not how curl typically have uh, support. This is not the syntax you typically have used when you provide long options to curl. And I don't really encourage anyone to start using this, but we add support for this because this is the style a lot of other command line tools already support. So the idea here is being by adding support for this, we can make curl work more similar to a lot of other tools. But since this is new now, then in curl 8.16.0, we shouldn't really use it right now. But over time, this might be a style we can start to use. So we should probably allow users and the world to update to newer curl versions for a while before we start using this. But anyway, now curl supports this style. A little more niche thing is that we added support for pretty much the current time to get output with the -w option, the write out option, which is the option that could add or sorry, can output a lot of details after the transfer has completed. It can add output speed and sizes and header contents and a lot of things from the particular transfer. And now we can also output the time in a pretty flexible way, which is useful in cases, for example, if you use this output as, for example, a log output for transfers, then it can be handy to get the time out as well. So that was a few things. So we introduced negative caching of name resolves, which for some reason we have never done before, which is kind of, I don't know, surprising. So it basically means that we remember a failing name resolve for a while. And not only the positive responses. So if we, for example, if we resolve a host name and we get a success, we get the IP addresses back, we store them in a DNS cache for 1 minute by default. And now we also remember a failing name resolve for a while. We actually store it for half the cache timeout by default. And why do we do this? Yeah, it actually helps performance. For example, again, back to the doing 1,000 parallel transfers. What if you do 1,000 parallel transfers using the same host name and that host name fails to resolve? It's kind of inefficient to just try to resolve it again 1,000 times in a short amount of time. Instead, we could just remember that no, it has failed. It'll continue to fail for a short period of time. It just makes it more efficient to handle bad host names. We switched to a new way to do happy eyeballing. So happy eyeballs is this algorithm, is originally the algorithm where we start first an IPv6 connection attempt and then an IPv4 connection attempt, and we race them against each other. So whichever connection attempt that wins, the first one to succeed wins, and we discard the other ones. So that makes it sort of transparently adapt or use the one that actually works and the fastest one. And then when we do those two different connection attempts in parallel, and we iterate over IP addresses, whenever one fails, we try the next one and the next one and the next one, and sort of those two lines compete together. They race actually. But now we do it differently. So if we try one IP address and it hasn't completed within the timeout time, we try the next IP address without killing the previous one. So we'll add more connection attempts in parallel in an attempt to connect faster to a IP address. We have bumped the minimum embed TLS version to 3.2. Basically, embed TLS is one of the TLS libraries we support, and they have more or less end of life the older versions, and so we drop support for them as well because we don't want to encourage anyone to use them, and we don't want to keep support stuff that the this project doesn't support anyway. So leaving that behind. We have a new function in the API called curl multi get oft, and the funny name here, the oft is more of a is an off t. It's a 64-bit counter or 64-bit variable. So it is a way to extract 64-bit values from the multi-handle contents or information from a running multi-handle. You can get information about number of transfers ongoing and queued up and things like that. And this is one of these functions that we are likely to add more data to over time when we think of more things to offer to applications and that applications might be interested in to get to know about in the running multi-handle. We have added a fun option, and this is a little bit of a weird option or unusual option because this is more of a you set this option when a network has changed, and you set this option for a multi-handle. So if you have a long-running application and you as an application or figure out that the network has changed, you have moved around, you know, you're either your laptop is changing Wi-Fi or you're changing things or your mobile phone is moving around, then you can set this option and to then trigger activities or actions in libcurl depending on what you want it to happen, you know, flashing the DNS cache, flashing connections and things like that. Basically to make curl aware that things have changed and it needs to adapt to the new conditions. We support this uppercase netrc environment variable because someone actually reported and figured out that a lot of other netrc tools and libraries are actually nowadays recognizing this environment variable as a way to find the particular file to read. Instead of using the one .netrc in your home directory, it first checks this environment variable. If that is set, that's the full path name to a file to use instead of the one in home. So it's an attempt to follow it's not actually standard, more of a, well, de facto standard it might be, become at least. So you see quite a few things, and we're reaching the third page here of changes in this release. So we bumped the minimum required MingW version to build curl up to version 3, dropping old things to simplify, and we don't have to linger around or provide, you know, weird workarounds for old stuff. It's actually pretty nice to just leave some of that worst craft behind. We added support for a suffix behind a mail address in the style that RFC 3461 explains that it should work for SMTP. Pretty much it allows you to send instructions to the server in the mail address field because that's how SMTP is designed. We have bumped the default TLS version to be minimum 1.2, independent of what the actual TLS library does. So pretty much most TLS libraries that we support, they actually also support TLS 1.0 and 1.1, not all of them, but most of them. And and they still support that, but now curl asks for TLS 1.2 as a minimum by default. So if you want curl to use a lower TLS version or negotiate a lower TLS version than 1.2, you actually have to ask for that as a attempt to just raise the bar a little bit. 1.0 and 1.1 are considered deprecated in many cases, so this shouldn't be a problem, but you can always then lower the minimum if that's a problem for you that you need to work around. We have cut out support for the MSH3 HTTP3 backend. This is a library using the MS Quick library to do HTTP3. We have had support for this, well, experimental support for this for a few years. It never really worked, and it was had a lot of things outstanding that was never really completed, and no one seemingly wanted to work on it. So we removed it to, again, in order to simplify, remove things that are mostly in the way, doesn't work anyway, didn't seem to have any users, so it's gone. We have still have three other HTTP 3 backends that we support and work with and so on. So there's certainly no shortage in HTTP 3 solutions anyway. We now support the read callback when doing WebSocket communication, which simplifies how to do WebSockets really. In particular, if you want to do many concurrent HTTP 3, sorry, many concurrent WebSocket transfers, like when using the multi-interface or similar. Whew. So those are some of the new ones. Those are actually all the new things, the changes, the new features and the big things. We also then managed to land what we count to 260 bug fixes in the release notes file. And out of those 260, I went through the list. I consider that most of them are not that fun to talk about, so I'm not going to talk about them. So I then extracted some of my favorite ones, or perhaps the most notable ones. For example, we now do use 64-bit counters properly for URL indexes. So now you can really use URL globs on the command line and get properly. You can actually really truly do 64-bit number, 64-bit number of URLs on the command line with globbing, which I guess was more of a theoretical limit. It was just one of these, why, oops, is a mistake. We should just fix it. And we did. And we fixed an actually kind of annoying regression in the previous version that made curl segfault for some simple command lines because we a segfault in the read callback. We fixed another kind of a just stupid omission that we didn't accept negative file time properly. So the dash capital R is called dash dash remote time in the long version. So basically when you ask curl to set the same time on the local file as the time of the remote file, right? And if that remote file had a time stamp or a date before 1970, it would get a negative file stamp, of course, because that's how the time t works, right? But curl would ignore that and throw it away and not set the time, but it shouldn't. It should use that. So in the particular bug case, they found, or they used the example of a file with a date from 1940, and of course curl should then set the date to 1940 if that's what the server says, and now it does. Another just a tiny little thing. So if you set dash dash trace config to something and then use dash v on the command line, the dash v would sort of override values from the trace config, and it would end up a little bit surprising. I tried to address that. I've added a way for curl to, okay, so a while ago I added support where I made curl, the command line tool, then output a warning in the terminal if you use a URL that starts with what looked like a Unicode double quote, because that happens when people copy and paste URLs sometimes from a document somewhere. You go to a web page and you copy that URL and you paste it into a terminal, and if you happen to do that and you have a Unicode double quote first, that Unicode double quote will not be just removed as a typical shell will do with a ASCII double quote. No, it'll be part of the host name, and it'll be totally surprising, and you probably fail the command line. So we added a warning for that so that users would notice. And now, and in a bug report, we noticed that people would get other Unicode characters first in a host name when they copied things. and curl didn't warn about it, and it was also a little bit surprising. So therefore, I have now tried to make sure that curl warns on more Unicode uh, more Unicode characters when they start a host name, because that that's probably a mistake on a curl command line. The challenge is that you can still use IDN host names, right? So an IDN host name, it is an international domain name, that could still use Unicode characters. So I can't just detect Unicode and warn about that, because that might be exactly what you want to do. So anyway, yeah. I also fixed a kind of annoying performance thing in. So if you use curl on Windows, which some of you actually do, and you use that in a console and use curl and get a web URL, and it'll show it on in the console output. Curl would previously actually do allocate and freeze uh, in the code for every chunk that it outputs to the terminal, which it just sort of it hurt my brain when I saw it. So nowadays it doesn't. It'll just reuse the same buffer and avoid doing malloc and free a billion times if you do a lot of output. Um, and we fixed some documentation thing. The if you do curl dash h dash an option or whatever, and then you get a piece of the man page output in the terminal, or a piece, you get the long help text for that particular option, and that actually in some cases got screwed up syntax at, because I had this end of table thing. So it looked fine in the man page, it looked wrong when output as pure text in the terminal. Fixed now. In this in the same series that we've done for a while now in curl, we have removed a lot of base 64 encoded chunks that appear in source code or test cases or everywhere, to pretty much remove the risk that someone would send something along, or hidden content that is base 64 encoded and you don't see what it is. It could be actually something crazy when you decode it. In the same vein, we have now removed a bunch of base 64 encoded stuff from examples, just because we didn't really need to do that. We could just as well not do it. Someone went to great lengths. So we removed this example from the. We have a bunch of full examples right in the documentation folder, 100 something helpful examples, I think, because they're complete standalone examples of how to use the libcurl API in many different ways. So I think that's a great set, and we should always try to keep expanding that. But one of the examples, like what was called href extractor.c, it used a library that was hosted on GitHub. So it showed sort of how to download something with curl and use this library to extract the href tags from a web page. Fine. But that href, the library it used, hosted on GitHub, was abandoned by someone, and someone else then figured out, hey, I could just register the same name now, and I can host some kinds of malicious code instead, called the same thing, and provide a library that is now providing the same API, but it is also doing something malicious. And that's exactly what someone did, and said, hey, now this example code is using a malicious library that blah, blah, blah. Sometimes people go to great lengths to prove a point. So we removed the example because, of course, the library that used is gone, and it's just now a malicious proof of concept, I guess. We have fixed HTTP3 for newer NGTCP2 versions, because they have moved things around on how they work with different TLS libraries, and we have tried to adapt to that. We have bumped a lot of, and here's a little bit of a crazy thing, but we have changed a bunch of macros, or defines actually, or changed them around in the public header so that they're now defined as long values and not just any value. Because in this constant race, because our API is sometimes a little bit too lenient in letting the wrong type of value in. So by adding the long type into the define, we actually help a lot of applications to make sure that they actually provide long values into the set options where they should be long. And similarly, I added support for the added type checks for the curl multi-setup option in the same style that we have done for the curl easy setup options before. So it helps applications to get warnings if they pass in the wrong type in this function, because this function is a var arg function, right? So it can actually accept any type. So a compiler can't normally verify the type. So we have added that extra type check using weirdo GCC and the Clang magic stuff. Here's the thing, we don't treat the leading slash as a trailing slash in the cookie parser, which it did before. So if you just had a single path, or the path was set to just a one slash, single slash, the root path, we treated that as a trailing slash and removed it. So the path got a 0 length, which was a mistake and part of the reason we got that security advisory. Another tiny little thing is that we now remove expired cookies before listing them, because we have this API that lists all the existing cookies, so it could also easily list expired cookies, which seem to be pointless because they are expired and they won't be used anymore. So now they're not provided in the list anymore. We had a regression where we actually used cookies without the lock in the way we should do the lock. So if you shared cookies between threads, as you can do with the share interface, you could actually get into trouble. Fixed now. We changed the pruning of DNS data to be done with a millisecond resolution instead of full integers resolution, which is good because it makes them it's more accurate, and it'll sort of prune them in the right order and prune more exact instead of from roughly 1 to 2 seconds. Now it's pretty much exactly 1 second if you put it into 1 second. This was also a mistake that caused some trouble. So, IDN names are really crazy. So if you provide an IDN name, which is then provided in Unicode, and to be able to use an international domain name over the internet, right, we had to convert that IDN name to Punicode. Punicode being the ASCII version of that Unicode name. But you can then, in Unicode, there are letters or characters that they convert into nothing. So if you would set an IDN, a host name with just one of these, this is a 0 with character, the IDN conversion functions would convert that into nothing. So from a Unicode name with length into an ASCII version without length. And we didn't correctly protect ourselves from that. So we would end up sometimes with a zero length host names in the code, which we have protections against that, so it shouldn't be possible, but this was a way to sort of circumvent that check. Now we've added that check even for IDN host name, so hopefully we're better now. We didn't quite reset the rewind flag in curl easy reset. So if you did rewinding and you used easy reset, it could get confused. We have improved the SFTP transfer performance for the libSSH backend. So we should do SFTP downloads better, faster now with the libSSH backend. We fixed a bug in the display tree management. Again, a rather rare but also a rather annoying bug that could cause crashes, especially when doing a lot of concurrent transfers. So also hard to track down and understand. We did we did an internal cleanup so that we can better handle dates uh, when we parse dates, like if you get a date back for an HTTP document, and that date happens to be the epoch time exactly, 1st of January 1970, which happens to be a date people often test with, right? That's epoch 0. And we, for reasons, our internal API was stupid and treated that 0 especially, so we couldn't really handle that epoch 0 as a correct date. So we shuffle things around, and now we can handle that date correctly, even if the date is time is 0 seconds since 1970. We had some multi-SSL problems when we wanted to get a random number earlier than we had initialized this setup, so we got into trouble. We fixed, I think, finally a renegotiation bug with the S-channel backend, so we should be a little bit better there now. The OpenSSL API has a way to do asynchronous certification of asynchronous verification of certificates, and it's a weird API, but anyway, so it sort of delays the verification, and now when we added support for that a while back, but apparently it didn't quite work, or at some point it started to fail and we broke it, and now we have brought back some support for that, and we make sure that we pause the transfer while that asynchronous verification is being done. OpenSSL has a really fun and crazy way to do and store errors, or they have an error queue, internal error queue, that is kind of hard to understand and mysterious in many ways. So it made sometimes when we use the function and then we detect the error a little later when we use some other function and check for the error. So we have to clear the error queue better in some points in time. And that's what that change did. We also fixed this SSL keylog feature when you build with AWS LC, so that you can get the TLS keys logged, so that you can better, use Wireshark, for example, and capture your TLS traffic, which is an awesome feature. We made sure that the handshake timeout when using HTTP3 and quick connects with the NGTCP2 backend is, if you set a short connect timeout, we should have a short quick timeout as well. We can now use the custom memory functions even when built with NGTCP2, so that NGTCP2's all memory allocations are done using the custom functions, which helps the users who want to customize and control their allocations. We had a silly regression when we mixed up struct types actually internally when using GNU TLS and quick connections in this particular callback that we added support for in the previous version. We now have fixed the handling of Pong frames in WebSockets, because previously we could reply to Pongs in the middle of an ongoing other message, which broke the communication when the ping arrived. So we should do Pongs better now. And we also better handle zero length frames, because it turns out that we need to handle zero length frames for WebSockets in ways we don't really do for other protocols, because sometimes people send the flags separately from the content. So we might need get the last part of content and then an update of flags, which then might be zero length data in that frame. And we also had a bug where we didn't properly reset the upload done flag that we have internally for WebSockets uploads, which just made us expect more data to come when it was already complete, in a way that made it, I'm not sure it busy looped, but it worked a lot more than it had to, at least. So we talk about all that, and of course you can go to this page and look at the full changelog. I mentioned 260 bug fixes, so there's a lot, and almost all of them are linked to their original sources for issues and pull requests and whatever. There's a lot of details to read up if you're curious, and of course submit your new bugs if you find uh, new things that don't work as they are supposed to do. So we are having a bunch of things that we're planning to remove, pending sunsets from the curl from curl. In September, which happens to be now, right? September 2025, we will drop support for the wind build system. We have a series of different build systems in curl and how to build curl. One of them we called the wind build system, which is a set of makefiles using nmake on Windows. And we will drop that and encourage people to instead use the cmake build system, which should be able to build the exact same set of builds, just removing things for us to maintain, sort of going with a reduced set of options, which for us is better because we get less work to do. In November, which is not too far from now, 2025, we're going to drop support for building for Windows CE and building with Visual Studio 2008. They're sort of uh, associated with each other, but we're going to drop support for those. So bye-bye. Also, again, it'll remove legacy stuff and workarounds, special tweaks and quirks that we have for those versions. It'll clean up things. It'll make our lives easier. That's pretty much why we remove a lot of things. I mean, that's the reason for a lot of these removals, to just make our lives easier. In December, for example, we're going to drop support for OpenSSL 1.0 branches. I think 1.0.2 is the one that's actually has survived for a while. OpenSSL themselves have dropped support for this in public for a while back, so no one should use the open version of this anyway because it's not being patched. In January, we will drop support for Windows XP and Windows Server 2003. Again, to make things easier and simpler, and there aren't that many users around building new curl on for these operating systems anyway. And of course, these operating systems have been end of life for a long time, so we should just drop it. Them. We're going to remove support for anything for CIRS for anything before CIRS 1.16.0 in March, and because CIRS before this version, in this version, which is actually by that time it's going to be 6 years old, they introduced a bunch of new APIs that we like to use, but we still support all of the older ones that we basically don't test and run enough. So it'll be fine to get rid of that, and it'll really clean up our CIRS code paths. And really, people shouldn't be using older versions anyway because of reasons. And in June 2026, quite a far away still, we're going to drop support for the last OpenSSL 1 things. And so OpenSSL 1 is not supported, and no branch is supported by OpenSSL in the public. So if you're using the free version or the open version of OpenSSL, you don't get any security updates. So we shouldn't encourage anyone to use the open version of OpenSSL 1. OpenSSL still supports them with private support deals. So if you're a customer of that, you might still use OpenSSL 1, and if you still use one of those, I would urge you to contact us and we can see what we can do for you to help you keep using that going forward. Maybe. So that's what we plan to do next. So, and the next curl release is likely to become 8.17.0. I mean, who knows? If we find something really terribly bad in this release, there might be a patch release, but hey, surely there won't be. And in this next 8.17.0 release, we might see one of these things because we have already a bunch of PRs and proposals and ideas of what to do coming up Next. So we want to have add native CA support for Apple operating systems. Uh, who knows? Maybe it'll happen this time, or at least we wanted to work on it. Uh, so we have this long going pull request to add support for alt service fallbacks. Basically, when the alt service header tells curl to try a number of different alternatives, and when those alternatives fail, curl should fall back and try the original one or one of the other alt service options. So this is a PR for that. I have a PR coming for making this headers support in the -w option able to output all headers with a particular name. Imagine, for example, that you ask curl to follow redirects, and maybe you even follow multiple redirects, right? So you get a bunch of responses, and maybe you get headers with the same name in several of those responses. Now, with this tweak, you can ask curl to output the contents of the header from all responses in the entire redirect chain, like the server header, for example, or date, or I don't know, whichever header you're interested in. We want to have this HTTP3 proxy work merged, but it seems to have gone stale, so I'm not too positive about this gonna happening soon, but who knows? It would be really fun. We have new notification concept for multi-handles to get for applications to get told about events that is happening for the multi-handle. I think that's going to happen. We have a new way to output the dash H output. Basically, when you're asking curl for help, you can now output that help in a table output. It, it was originally made to sort of generate the cheat sheet automatically, and now it has sort of gone into outputting the help output in a more table, maybe output help friendly way. So I think that's gonna happen. And we have this ongoing discussion and pull request for adding a build option to use the native CA store by default. So for example, if you use curl on, if you use the native one on, for example, Mac OS or the Windows one, the Microsoft chip, and even on most Linux and BSDs, right? When you use curl, it actually, when on the command line tool, it actually uses the native CA store by default because that's usually what you want. But if you build curl, for example, with Open SSL on Windows today and you run it, it doesn't actually use the native CA store by default. So this introduces a way to build curl to act like that, because probably some users want that. Okay, so if things go well and if we happen to follow the release cycle and everything is fine and dandy, which of course it will be, November 5 is the date when we will do the next release, and I will sit here and talk about it, possibly a little bit darker then, because I'm in Sweden and November is dark in Sweden. So this is the URL. You can figure out our ongoing development release notes in progress file. It'll grow slowly during the release cycle or sometimes quickly. And the release cycle, of course, as I tend to remind you about, so this is today, a release Wednesday. We cool down for 10 days. We don't merge any features for 10 days. For another 10 days to just wait for the alarming super bad report to come in. And if there's an alarming super bad report, we might do a patch release next week. But if we don't, and maybe sometimes even if we do, we have, after this 10-day cool down period, there's a feature Saturday. When we open the feature window, we have 3 weeks of features sort of flowing into the tree, and we merge things and everything is fine and dandy, and then wham, there's a free Saturday. We close the feature window. There's then 25 days of feature freeze before it's released Wednesday again. So on and on and on. This is the 8 weeks release cycle that never ends for curl. And nowadays we do the release candidate 1 when we enter feature freeze, we do a release candidate 2 9 days later, and we do a release candidate 3 another 9 days later, which happens to be exactly 7 days before the release Wednesday. So this is the setup that we have ongoing now. So if things go well, there, as you can see, there are 31 days from now until we do the release candidate 1 for the next release. Yep, and you can mark your calendars because that's how it's supposed to look like. And of course, if you need help in a commercial setting or environment, or then get in touch and we will help you out because that's what we do. If you find problems in curl, typos, something is wrong, submit an issue. We have 3 open issues right now, so we have room for more. If you have any problems, any issues, anything that is not as it's supposed to be, file an issue. If you have a security problem or suspect a security problem or something is vulnerable somewhere, submit it to our HackerOne page issue tracker, when we will keep those, of course, completely private and non-disclosed until we have worked on them and figure them out, and then we will publish and sync with the next release and all of that we've in the same way we did this time, right? We had 2 vulnerabilities and they were both submitted on HackerOne, and we have worked with them, the reporters. And you can also go to HackerOne, this address, and check our activity, because we always disclose all the previous ones, so you can actually see all our work and all our traffic on that site repeatedly, because we get maybe 2, 3, 4 a week nowadays, and all of them will be disclosed over time. And of course, these are the fine sponsors, the top sponsors of curl now in September 2025, that they really make us help do this, and they keep the train going, the ship sailing. And yep, this is curl. That's the website. Thank you for watching. See you in the next release. Bye.